Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to the mini game podcast for Monday, April 28th. Normally, which is an insane phrase to even start this sentence with, I would be starting this even later in the evening, but yeah, my sleep schedule is always just never consistent, so as I scroll down the 24-hour peak concurrent SteamDB chart here, which we can see Oblivion Remastered is holding strong in the fourth spot. Yeah, normally I would start later, but I managed to kind of wake up later at a reasonable time at like 7 in the morning and have been awake the whole time since then. So it's either definitely a case of starting streaming now and then going to sleep after this, or I'm going to go to sleep now and then wake up 4 to 8 hours from now, which would be 8 in the morning, well, no, closer to 4 in the morning, I guess, on Tuesdays. And yeah, so that doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, even though weirdly I am getting more views, still being somewhere in the evening. I may be very far off the peak time, though. It may very well be the case that 5 in the evening, 3 in the afternoon is even better of a spot. But yeah, early in the morning, which is what I was doing before, it definitely wasn't working. That's about as much as I can say with any certainty. So yeah, just wasn't feeling sleepy enough to go to sleep, but now obviously that I'm sitting upright and starting to do something, I'm gonna immediately be hit with a wave of sleepiness almost certainly. There is also this Claire Obscura Expedition 33 that's out, which weirdly I just don't think there's a case here where a lot of people are going to talk about this in what you would expect is reasonable amount of time for most new games, in that I think there's just a lot of mainstream video game journalists here that are playing Oblivion Remastered, which for the past 3 to 5 streams, I will say, we've been playing the game as far as instead of talking specifically about the controversies, which my news sources aren't really covering with Oblivion Remastered, we will just say, let's play the game and ask everybody viewing to see amongst your circle of influencers, your news sources, are you hearing about the controversies? The first controversy was the remaster, changing it from when you create a character from being male to female to being body type 1 and 2, despite the fact I now hear that the lines of dialogue are actually still gendered. So body type 1, I assume, is either going to have you be called him or her, vice versa for body type 2. And then the second controversy expands on that, in that there was apparently now I hear, very popular, if not the most popular mod on Nexus Mods for Oblivion Remastered, that then restores the gender selection back to male and female, which it was originally in the original game. Although this is effectively a remake, and I think they completely made a mistake by calling it a remaster. Well, there was even a third controversy now I've heard about, and a lot of this is probably just rage baiting on many people's sides, but apparently one of the mainstream video game journalists, maybe one of IGN's, I think there are several IGNs like IGN Europe and IGN America, IGN Canada, claims that some accusations that never actually went anywhere against the original musician who created the original music for Oblivion Remastered should have led to the music being completely changed in the game. Which, yeah, while video is trumped by most people in video games, to remaster a game and then force a whole new generation to hear completely different music has never been a popular thing. Whether it's usually it's a case where you lose the rights to the music, but yeah, this is, from what I could hear and understand, a cancel culture attempt on something that was an accusation that never really was investigated, and accusations never went anywhere and were never dropped, and never proven. So it really is just, you have to assume that the musician is innocent until proven guilty, and leave it at that. That this was a accusation made right at the very peak of that Me Too movement, in which a lot of accusations were made, and a lot of those tended to not lead anywhere and feel less than important in my mind, as far as just someone made an awkward pass at somebody, or somebody had a bad date. Of course, there were definitely monsters revealed, and I imagine there still are monsters as far as it goes. I really wish, instead of the Me Too movement, and we'll not talk about this too much because it's not directly video game related, but I wish it had been more of a broader movement to just point out how awful managers are in general. Like, because certainly it's perhaps too commonplace, but a significant number of associate level employees could talk about managers who straight up stole hours from them, who hit on them inappropriately. Certainly that could have been part of it, but then there's also managers who straight up punch and physically hit associate levels, and steal things from them, scheme them, scam them. A lot of jobs in general tend to be straight up scams. Wage theft is the biggest theft in the United States, and it does not get talked about enough. So if there had been a broader movement to say, hey, the monsters are real, and they tend to be the people in power, as in managers and CEOs and things like that, let's take down these rich and powerful people with the truth behind us, that would have been a movement that I think a lot more people could have related to and agreed with, instead of it being a smattering of, here's some SJW elitist who is pretty well off already as being upper class, accusing some other probably also SJW elitist who is well off in upper class. But yeah, so ignoring that ramble, moving on, it is just, once again, I think worth it to continue down that idea of playing that game. And honestly, I think that's the best way to address all controversies going forward, because I definitely do, in my news sources, see them, but then I just kind of wonder if it really matters anywhere as much. It's kind of funny how Naraka Blade Point's video is still their April Fool's Day video. Yeah, but because Elder Scrolls is so big, the other big games like Schedule 1, which is doing great for what it is not really going anywhere. I watched an interesting YouTube video talking about how there are no Skyrim clones and how nobody's really successfully ripped off Skyrim. I would argue that Baldur's Gate 3 probably is very close to what Skyrim was as far as a fantasy world RPG game. I think perhaps one of the reasons why there isn't anything that feels exactly like Skyrim is because Skyrim is actually just a bad game in a lot of its game design concepts that I haven't even seen this game, Tilted Force. So yeah, I think we probably, as a gaming community, have just kind of gaslit ourselves into believing that Skyrim is a great game when it really isn't. It just happened to be a really good game for the time it came out, so much so that you could easily overlook the massive amount of bugs it has. And because it's so open, which is actually bad game design, and that is the major reason why nothing quite feels like a Skyrim clone, is because every other fantasy game is going to push you so you're always going forward in the narrative, whereas in Skyrim you can easily forget the main storyline and never finish it if you don't want to, or if you forget that it even is the main storyline. So yeah, the number of people who have seen the credits on Skyrim could be fairly low percentage-wise compared to other games, and usually that's only about a third of the players anyways. But yeah, the mechanics in Skyrim aren't amazing. Arguably, with Oblivion Remastered, I think a lot of people are realizing that like the magic system in Oblivion, I hear, is way better than Skyrim. But yeah, the physics in Skyrim was always buggy. Perhaps it was very ambitious, and thus it could show off a lot of things. But the core of it, the story and the experience, is pretty awful. And you don't even really have a consistency into it as far as what the main story is. You know in Skyrim that everybody's going to kind of start at the bottom of the map and work towards that central city, but after that you can go in almost any direction. You can go into any dungeon. The dungeons are very poorly cut, cookie cutter pasted, and rather small. Usually there's no reason to even go into a dungeon unless you have a story line quest around it. And then once you get into that central city, if you go to the left, you might end up siding with one side in the Civil War quest. If you go to the right, you might end up siding with another quest side of the Civil War. If you go north, you might eventually end up in the Mages Guild, but you'll probably be too low level to go immediately to that point. If you go a little bit north to the left in Skyrim, you might end up in the Assassin's Guild plot line, or the Elves plot line. If you go to the lower right, you might end up in the Thieves Guild plotline. Once you get into one of the major cities, of which there's probably about 6 of them, you then are given a whole bunch of side quests, and so you're given this mini game that really is mostly focused around just doing all the side quests around that city until you've finally exhausted everything in the city, or gotten bored and decided to move on. But that it kind of doesn't interconnect. If you're in the Thieves Guild city, there really doesn't have a lot of reason that you would end up leaving it around that area until you've just done all the quests you can possibly do. And so yeah, everybody's experience, even playthrough through playthrough, is very random, which it makes it a game more like Minecraft, which arguably I would say the same argument can be made for Minecraft, that it is a particularly bad game in that you're given very little of guidance as far as what you're supposed to do. In Minecraft's case, it's to build an end portal and defeat the Ender Dragon, as was at least the original ending to Minecraft, but super open world otherwise. But yep. And so that open-endedness perhaps makes a game that's completely replayable, but it makes a game that's kind of hard to sell and resell and resell. Skyrim being kind of an exception in that, or make a sequel to. Maybe that's the thing too that I'm overlooking here now that I think about it. Maybe the idea of staying financially successful for most games is that you have to make a trilogy of games, and that you can't just make a game that lasts forever. But then we see examples like Binding of Isaac. Well, that's not the case. In the case of Binding of Isaac, they're just constantly adding content to the game. So maybe making one good game and constantly adding to it is the right move. And maybe that is the reason why there's not been any Skyrim clones, is because Skyrim is the Skyrim clone. The massive amount of mods you can put into the game. But I can't help but wonder if that hurts the next generation of players quite a bit, in that you then just don't have the capability of selling to a new audience a new game. All you can do is sell to a new audience the old game. But yeah, maybe I don't fully grasp it, but on the surface of it, I definitely do feel like Skyrim, it's just got some major flaws in it. And it's not just the bugginess. The bugginess is a major part too. If there was a new Skyrim that was completely bug-free, sure, that would fix a lot. But the fact that you constantly are pushed into being a stealth archer shows a real imbalance in the mechanics. And frankly, in a modern game, if you were going to have an imbalance, instead of even trying to balance the game, maybe you just have random seeds and random versions of the game. So when you start the game, there might be an imbalance where archery is stronger in that run, and then a new game plus, it might be swords and shields. Ideally, you'd want it more balanced always, but the stealth archer imbalance is a big thing with Skyrim. The lockpicking minigame being ridiculously over prominent, just always there, is a big thing. The lack of pushing people to use magic is a big thing, or use potions is a big thing. The lack of a general push to make you go through the main story. I feel like a more modern game would have made you go through the main story almost as a tutorial section before the whole world opened up to you and you went past a certain level cap. Something along that lines. Yeah, and that's what you would see in another game, is that you'd be like at level 25 and it would say you're capped at level 25 until you finish the main storyline, and then all the regions are on the outskirts of Skyrim are going to be full of level 50 creatures that would just kill you. But it may very well also be the wrong question to ask as far as why is there no Skyrim clone when it comes to fantasy RPG games, there may just not really be enough of an audience out there. People... Whoops. That was a whole bunch of stuff that just fell on the floor. No worries though. They were precariously leaning and slid off. Guess my air conditioner maybe blew them. The one straw that broke the camel's back. Anyways, there may very well just not be an audience for fantasy games, fantasy RPG games, because if there really was, you would have thought there would have been a Lord of the Rings game that caught on a long time ago, or something else. And as far as the Japanese audience, which is the majority of RPG players, I would assume, or the Asian audience in general is almost certainly the majority of RPG players, they have many other options that they have gone through. Dragon Quest, Final Fantasy, some of those are sort of fantasy-like. They just aren't super hyper realistic graphics in the fantasy realm. But then you have Elden Ring, which, yeah, is certainly where a lot of the fantasy fans went, was the Dark Souls, Demon Souls series of games, is that they wanted a light amount of fantasy in the story, but they wanted a much harder amount of difficulty and less role-playing elements that would lead to a completely open world and more of a artistically curated world that is still fairly open but has paths to it and has enemies in specific spots. Yeah. In a lot of ways, Elden Ring is probably the latest iteration on what has been a direct counter argument to Skyrim. When you think of Skyrim's map, it is just a big circle with some mountains that sometimes will stop you from walking directly as the crow flies from point A to point B. Whereas Demon Souls, Dark Souls games, they are very narrow paths that you have to go. You map out the world. The world itself is also probably somewhat circular, but the way to get from point A to point B is going to be going point A, point B, point C, point Z, D, all the way through Z. There is just structure there. There's just artistry there. It's just not using Speed Tree or some other 3D modeling mapping software to quickly make forests everywhere in the world. Like, I don't think there's a single ocean or river really that would have been lost if it had been moved or removed from the game in the Elder Scrolls. There's a couple points where you're on a boat, so you need some water, but yeah. If they had moved the mountains around completely, if they had moved the rivers around completely in Skyrim, none of it would have changed much of anything. Which, yeah, it's also kind of crazy that they haven't done something like that. That there isn't. I haven't heard of a mod. If there is a mod out there that does something like that. But yeah, if every time you played Skyrim the land masses were in completely different places, that would be interesting at least. Be more procedurally generated world map. A big part of the Elder Scrolls series too is that there really is just not a very good story around what the Elder Scrolls are all about anyways, and what the deal there is. And Skyrim in particular had to introduce the whole concept of being dragonborn and having a dragon shout, which seemingly nobody is missing in the Oblivion remaster here. But yeah, that caught my attention, and as I was doing things today, which I've been doing things today, but it definitely has been kind of a nightmare. Man, why is so many people playing this game if it's so mixed? That is interesting. So one of the things I decided to do, and this led to a nightmare in itself, is I decided to add a second checkbox over here, which I intend to use to mark VR games that I want to keep an eye on, as far as having a separate follow list for VR games, considering how I am likely never going to actually have a VR headset, and not likely never going to buy one, but it is something I'm not ready to give up on. Now, inherently, pretty much anywhere where I put this a second checkbox, it's going to be in the way somewhere, and I probably should play around with it and put it back down here and just have two checkboxes next to each other. What I've also done is used the localization of date time function in JavaScript to shorten the date. So before it was showing the day of the week, the month, the day, the year, then the time, then the time zone, and then Greenwich Mean Time as far as daylight savings time. And so it's just showing a lot of extra information that would take up more space in the local storage cookies that these are, and would frankly just not ever be too useful for me. All I really want to know is when did I add something to the follow list or the secondary follow list. So I changed that in both cases to just shorten things up and make it a little bit more readable. But what happened in the process is I hit undo in the JavaScript extension for Firefox that injects this JavaScript. I just hit Control-Z to undo it, and as such it deleted everything, and then I couldn't hit undo as in Control-Z again to redo it, or Control-Y or whatever the redo button shortcut key was. So I lost all of this for a brief moment. Now fortunately I had some foresight and have timed almost on the hourly backups made for the profile folder of Firefox, just in case it crashed. And so I was able to restore it from an hour previous, and then I was able to fix it. But yeah, it is, to add the second box is basically the exact same code. The only difference is instead of calling it last visited, I call it VR plus the URL of the window, so it's unique to that URL. And instead of using the Q ignore menu arrow ID element, which is this, it then selects, what was it, the glance container responsive right, which is this, or somewhere around here. So that's why it's over there. And frankly, I should probably change that to a different ID, put it somewhere else, because inherently for this case this has bumped this down in an awkward way. Although even if this was missing, this would have been bumped down in an awkward way, because there's too much text here. So that was one of the nightmares that I recovered from this morning, is losing all my code. And yeah, I took the opportunity after writing this code to lock it down and make a new GitHub repository to put the code on GitHub, just so I have a backup of it, which is, in this case, really, I'm just putting it in the README itself of the repository, so it's not even a particularly good system. There's a built-in way to back up all the codes for all websites using the JavaScript plugin. I could also save that if there were any other websites I was really modifying, which there aren't. So yeah, in the future, when I start doing follow list cleanup and can actually see my follow list again, I'll start putting all of the VR games that are on the follow list here, and probably all the VR games that are on the wish list here. And then I will have to use the other extension, the Local Storage Explorer extension, to then check for anything with a key named VR, starting VR, and that will be the way that I will be able to figure out what things are on the fall list, which is not even going to be a great way of doing things, but it's kind of the best I can think of doing right now. And I have 8,000 things on my fall list, and I need to get that down to about 1,000 at maximum, so we're desperately looking for that. Before that nightmare, I was working in what I like to call regular expression hell, or regex hell, in that I was working with my YouTube Shorts program. So it's just been all programming this entire weekend. It's been all programming probably all last week too, and so it's going to be weird to get back to the commentary on Blackwell Deception, but probably better that I take a break from that anyways, because that'll just let me have a better experience instead of playing the game twice in a row. But yeah, I was having a really hard time getting the regular expressions to work, which I always do with regular expressions. It's the one programming language that makes the least amount of sense to me, and I'm getting better every time I have to work with it, but I am never happy when I have to work with it. But yeah, I was able to finally figure out what I think is close to perfect code, if not perfect code, and get that working. So by getting that to work in my advanced scene switcher scripts, which are kind of programs but don't really have loops as far as a programming language, it itself is just a little rough as far as a thing to use, but it is really the best thing. I mean, the only thing you can use with OBS as an OBS extension. So I started to make go down the process of scripting how the YouTube Shorts would be made, because the way they're made is as in one big video that is a 3x2 grid. So 6 videos of YouTube Shorts are recorded all at once for 3 minutes straight. And then it uses a program called FFmpeg, an open source video editor, to chop that one giant video into 6 individual videos. And on top of that, the new thing I'm trying to add is text-to-speech, which on Windows, I'm doing it on Windows, which is probably a mistake, because I'm going to have to redo everything as soon as I move over to Linux. But doing it on Windows is proving to be stubborn and difficult. There's something about how this open source software called WSay, which is a clone of Say that Macintosh has, which is a text-to-speech thing. It uses Microsoft's voices, and for some reason OBS and Advanced Scene Switcher doesn't like to just directly call that program. So the program gets launched in its own shell, which isolates it and kind of sandboxes it away from the resources it needs to actually do what it needs to do. And so, yeah, I'm having to jump through hoops there, and it likes to lock up the whole process while doing it. But theoretically, I get it to work, and then it will be a very automated process where all of a sudden I will have YouTube Shorts that are going to have a nice AI, for lack of a better term, lady's voice reading the descriptions of the games, which maybe makes YouTube Shorts even more valuable as far as them being automated things as an extra service on my channel, which weirdly still they are the thing that is the only thing really airing on my channel. For anybody who has started to watch my channel since January 1st of 2025, you have not seen a single bit of the footage I actually want people to see. All you've seen is live streams and YouTube shorts, and all of my pre-recorded long plays where I sometimes have something better to say have just not been scheduled. And yeah, that is the next thing to focus on. And yeah, noticeably I'm not really focusing as much as far as cleaning and decluttering my house. And I just heard Joann's Fabrics is about to go out of business, and I have a slight temptation to go over to one of those and see if anything on clearance is worth getting. The only thing I was really thinking it might be getting would be like a Cricut vinyl cutter, but honestly I would never use it. Maybe I could find like some padding or stuffing or fabrics, but I don't sew. I don't have any real reason for any of that stuff. So it's hard certainly to justify going there other than to look for a deal as an excuse to probably waste money. But yeah, you probably could find some decent deals there. And it is occurring to me that right about now in the USA, if you could get good at fixing things without having to order too much supplies from anybody else, then there might be a resurgence in a generic repairman type business for at least a few years. But yep, if you're talking like fixing TVs or fixing cell phones, all of those parts still are going to be subject to tariffs. So yeah, you would have already had to stock up on those parts. Fixing computers, if they just have software problems, maybe a thing that has a slight resurgence, but I doubt it. And yeah, fixing TVs again are practically impossible to fix. Sewing clothes, fixing clothes, there might be something in that, certainly, as far as people just starting to think about living with things. Fixing cars, the bigger the items, certainly there might be a career in that, as far as just maintaining and repairing cars instead of people just buying new ones. But yeah, I think there's small opportunities there, and nothing's going to be guaranteed. Anyways, amongst also the nightmare of having it locked up for the whole text-to-speech in the YouTube Shorts app, I'm also still struggling with my macros, which they still are taking way too long to run, as far as opening all the video game news. And yeah, I'm still not getting it to quite work the way it should work, and I'm getting further and further away from understanding why it's not working the way it should work, which is irritating me, certainly. I'm also still watching some episodes of Monk, which, yeah, they got to a point, I think I'm in like season 5. Apparently his first psychologist no longer wanted to work for the show, or actually died, maybe, I'm not sure. Yeah, but they killed him off in the show very ceremoniously. Just one episode he's there, the next episode he isn't, which is funny because he was really starting to feel more like a character in the show than he was in the early days. And the show itself has just changed, done a full 180 as far as being much more comedic than that first pilot episode, which is dark and dramatic. And frankly, all of the first 3 seasons with Sharona is very much more dark and dramatic, whereas the later seasons are much more comedic, which is weird because then you have the weird contrast in Monk of the Dale the Whale character and the six-fingered man and the mystery around who killed his wife, where they definitely play up the idea of who killed his wife for drama and his wife being dead for drama, but then they've thrown in the most out of place and most ridiculous elements as far as who actually did it, which would not even feel in place with the current level of comedy that it is at season 5. So yeah, that whole element just feels kind of ridiculous. And they probably, once they got rid of Sharona and wanted to go in a different direction, should have also tried to tone back the Dale the Whale character. But yeah, so I'm still watching Monk, but Monk is also kind of stopping me from watching any other streaming shows, and I kind of wish I was bouncing around between 2 or 3 different shows. I'm still playing Madoka Magica, although the Madoka Magica storyline I have finished, which the main character here, can we see her? Yeah, that's Madoka, but she effectively is eliminated as the main protagonist in the game as they move on to side stories, which they have unlocked a 3rd side story, which is weird because like the main story had you potentially play through almost all of the main story, then it unlocks a side story which seems to somewhat connect to the main story in that there's just a whole different city with a whole different group of magical girls, and then it goes back to Madoka and finishes that off, and that's where I've gotten. And it does really feel like I am pretty much topped out as I can be in this point where it's been about a month now that this game has come out, and I really am just like, I think very close to being done with it. I'm at level 85, 86 out of 120. I have the maximum of 5 copies of many of the gacha anime girls, and that's with this game adding the side stories that are adding a whole bunch of girls I don't even recognize. And I wonder if this isn't the case that Madoka Magica is an anime. I watched that on Netflix, and because I watched it on Netflix, I didn't follow it or pay enough attention to it to see if anything new had come out from it. So it seems like I probably saw the first season of what effectively would be a 3-season or more show and just assumed that was the entire story. And that might be a great example of just where streaming is destroying art, in that particularly Netflix is very eager to have you watch something regardless of whether it's finished, regardless of whether it's going to get another season or not, and then just move on to the next thing. And so you don't really take time to appreciate or come back to things as much as you should. Yeah, Madoka Magica as a game definitely feels like it's just going to be topped out, and that I'm going to, by this time in 2 or 3 months, have maxed out all the levels, and unless there's just something else to it, it may very well be that I'm going to max out to the amount that I can go to, and then that they just haven't added enough content to the game. I'm trying to move my recliner's chair, and all that stuff is under it. Alright, so I'm still playing Memento Mori. They're about to add another new character, I believe. I'm still playing Pokemon TCG Pocket, but there's literally nothing to say there. And so, yeah, fortunately, early for today even, I'm going to have to take a bathroom break, so I'm going to pause the recording and I'll be back in a few minutes. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. And see, weirdly, like I'm trying still to get my macros to actually find the tabs in Firefox, which, yeah, I think is kind of partially Firefox's fault. And so I made some tweaks, but yeah, just sitting here in the background, that this tab crashed. And there's just no reason why this tab should have crashed. I mean, this is just a Steam hardware and survey software. It has a little bit of stuff going on with it if I turn off my extension, and that you'll click on things and go to other pages, but I mean, that's kind of it. I don't think there's anything too special here. Oh, speaking of special, I have been seeing, weirdly, still some slick deals for sales, and I can't help but assume that just the standards are going to go lower and lower. But like, I've been seeing some computer builds that don't look terrible. Ryzen 5s, Ryzen 7s, the 9900X instead of the X3D is probably only 3 or 4 steps below the top of the line, which would I assume still be the 9800 X3D, which is what I bought. Although the 9900 series might have something different that makes it more appealing. But yeah, I haven't really seen a massive lack of sales for things. It definitely feels like what people are trying to do here is sell out through their storage facilities and just sell out in stock. I don't know if the plan is to make as much money as possible as soon as possible and then go bankrupt or what, but yeah, there still are some sales that I'm seeing for all kinds of things, not just computer stuff. There is a YouTuber, and this doesn't have too much to do with video games. Well, no, this has absolutely nothing to do with video games, who likes to talk about technology. Air conditioning technology in particular is one of his favorites, and so he talked about a dehumidifier and where one would be useful and where one wouldn't be. And he talks about how, in his opinion, which I do mostly trust his opinion, but he could definitely be wrong, dehumidifier units are really only good for garages or basements, places that are poorly insulated and you don't mind pouring a bunch of heat out into the atmosphere, and otherwise inside the house you should be using your air conditioner to dehumidify, which Ecobee, which is my thermostat, does allow for that, but I had turned that off because I don't think it works very well. And he suggested a suggestion which I believe might very well be the case, because I've heard this complaint from many people, in that maybe my air conditioner, when it was installed, was oversized, which tends to be exactly what most people do when they install an air conditioner, is that the air conditioner salesman will put in something that is either the same size as what was there before, not taking into account that the original air conditioner that might originally have come with the house might have been oversized, and not taking into account that the newer air conditioners might be more efficient. So what's the problem with an oversized air conditioner? Apparently a lot, but one of the things that might be wrong with it is that it is going to run too long. No, that's the wrong thing to say. It's going to run too short, in that it'll take 5 minutes to get the air around the thermostat down, but it won't pay any attention to the air in the corner of a room that is like in a bedroom in a corner of a house. And so then you have to adjust by setting like overcooling settings and then having the air too cold near the thermostat to try and balance it out, and then you need like remote sensors and thermostats to try and balance it out. But also, as far as humidity goes, if it's not running for a long enough amount of time, it can't take the humidity out of the air as well, and that definitely seems like that's the case. Now, I can only really speak to my experiences that for maybe 6 months to a year, I've had a powerful dehumidifier unit that was sitting right next to the thermostat in one room and probably was pouring heat in the room, but I'm not sure I ever noticed it because I was never really in that room, and the only person that would have been in that room is constantly cold anyway, so they may very well have just enjoyed it. In fact, they were running a space heater whenever they were in the room anyways, so they were pouring even more heat into the room, which, yeah. So anytime I was trying to get a corner of the room, situation has changed now for the better in that case, but in the past it very much was a fight where the one room which was going to get most of the air conditioning was also being heated, and then the bedrooms in the corner of the houses in the house were not getting cooled well enough. And I still have a bit of a problem where I have a computer that's pouring out a good 5 to 6 degrees hotter than I should be, making the room 5 to 6 degrees hotter than any of the other rooms. And frankly, right now I'm in a situation where there's a decent argument to turn off the central AC altogether, or turn it way down and just have a window unit, because I'm really only staying in one room anyways. But yeah, probably would be a stupid thing to do anyways. But yeah, so I've reset the dehumidifying setting on the EQB to see what it will do now, but I can definitely tell you that in my personal situation, it does feel like it allows it to get to about 60 degrees relative humidity, when personally I would like it closer to 45% or degrees relative humidity. And the air conditioner itself can really only get to maybe 50 degrees anyways. So I may find myself turning my dehumidifier back on. Otherwise, I could certainly put it in my garage and dehumidify all of my Nintendo collection that's in the garage, although it's 10 years too late. If moisture's gotten into it and destroyed it, that's long since happened. And that's why I don't ever want to open the boxes and look in to see what kind of state they are in. Almost certainly that would break my heart to realize that even a fraction of my collection was destroyed. It's very possible it is. But yeah, I've also seen several YouTubers talk about how they oversize their air conditioners, particularly in the UK, and that creates some real problems, either taking up too much space or just not efficiently working. But yeah, if you think about a central AC unit, you kind of would want it to be running all the time at a very low level of cooling, just a gentle breeze balancing out the entire house. You wouldn't want it to come on and blast and freeze you out for several minutes, and then as you get to just about being comfortable, it then goes away and it's too hot again, and then it kicks back on and blasts and freezes you out again. Yeah, I guess that's the difference between jumping in a walk-in freezer and jumping into or jumping into a hot tub and then jumping into an ice bath. Is that's kind of a two extremes, where most people would just want to be in a cool but not cold swimming pool. So yeah, that does feel like that's the case, although there's nothing I can really do about it either. The worst case scenario would be if my air conditioner broke. I could try and push for them to size it down, but they would almost certainly say no to that. And even if I could physically size down, instead of just efficiency rating size down my AC unit, it wouldn't really help me. I would need it to be considerably smaller to then have to do some major remodeling to just get a few inches of space from the back side of it, to put a closet on the back side of it, which would be nice, because on the back side of my air conditioner on one wall is my bathroom, so it would mean I could widen up a bathroom closet enough that I could put a double stack washer and dryer unit in it, or something like that, and have it fit, which would be nice. But it is frankly a major remodel for a house that's not really going to benefit from that kind of remodel. Yeah. As I am cleaning and decluttering and doing a little bit of do-it-yourself remodeling as much as I can, I'm also certainly tempted to think about what moving would look like and feel like for me, and honestly it would be a nightmare. Like, I definitely could size down to a smaller location, but it would be a major nightmare to just pack everything up. And inherently I want things to be organized and in some kind of level of good order, and I just don't ever get to that point. Everything always just ends up being a mess. Yeah, effectively I need somebody like Monk to organize things and clean things and do perfectly. Which, yeah, that's one thing that I definitely feel like Monk would be great at, is if you hired him to be a house cleaner and house organizer, if you hired him to be a house painter, he would do it great. Of course, if Monk was a real person, of course. Stellar Blade was released last year, April 26th, I guess. But yeah, he'd take forever, certainly, and agonizing over it. Now, I know when I was testing out my macro, I made some changes, and all of a sudden I was putting the wrong information into this chart. But I'm not sure if that 100% explains what the heck has gone wrong with this chart. Like, this chart is supposed to always start with the lowest total number here, which should be this, and move it upwards to the highest total number of points, which it does seem like everything here on this side is still mostly accurate, but like Team Fortress 2 definitely feels like it should be over here, and there's just something feels weird about how this all has gone through. Yeah, and I'm still heavily debating whether this chart is ever going to have any real value or not. As far as, is it really telling me anything? I kind of don't think it is. I think I've found more interesting information to talk about at this point than just what game happens to be played the most, which I think really the experiment is, and that I've learned from this, is that the truth of the matter is it doesn't really matter to me personally whether a lot of people, whether they're humans or whether they're bots, are playing Counter-Strike 2 or not. And I think that's probably true for a lot of non-Counter-Strike 2 players. And so gamers as a community, if we truly are a community, which I don't think we really are much more interested in Oblivion right now. But if Oblivion became the game that everybody played for years and years upon years, much like Skyrim would be, the story would eventually just evaporate and people would not really care about that. I actually have very little video game news today, and I can't help but think that Oblivion is involved in that. And it definitely seems weird that you're getting just like very lewd anime girls on the front page of Steam, which, yeah, yes, I am signed into my account, but yeah, maybe Steam has finally lost the prudes that sometimes seemed like they were in charge a little bit of Steam, because I would think that these games in particular were the ones that are kind of being hand-picked. They're not just algorithmic. Now, the truth of the matter is, if they are algorithmic, it's not really super surprising to have a 3D CG lewd game and then a 2D anime girl game that in actual gameplay doesn't even have that 2D art aesthetic. The truth of it is, has always been the case that lewd games sold extremely well on Steam. And yeah, there just is an audience out there that for that, and they just are effectively silenced in most cases, because it is very hard for people to say I'm lewd and I'm proud, where it's very easy to say I'm a prudish or I'm a prude and proud. Pervert and proud, I guess, maybe is a better phrase to use if you're gonna coin a term. One of the YouTubers, Sex Positive Gaming's channel, has a saying, no judgment, just fun, or something along that line. I don't think that's actually the phrase. Yeah, the Blueprints is another game that is likely going to just be forgotten as far as a game. And while I'm tempted to watch footage of people playing that, I think that's going to spoil the whole experience. So it's yet another game for me that I'm going to have to try and stay radio silent on. No shaming, just gaming is what Sex Positive Gaming's phrase is. Now that I think about it. Of course, the whole argument around the Steam Deck versus a Switch 2 perhaps gets hurt a little bit when the front page of Steam can, in some cases, show adult games, but you can totally make a child's account that would not show any of that content. Of course, they would have to be logged into that account, although they probably still wouldn't see adult games if they weren't logged into some account. Yeah. One thing that I am realizing as I watch other content creators is just how incredibly easy it would be for me to hand off a lot of games to other people. as far as the big AAA games like Repo, that is just really a completely different audience from me, and it's really just not anything I would actually want to play. Here comes the yawning. An hour and 5 minutes in, that's what I figured was going to happen. So yeah, what Star Wars games do I not own at this point, as far as May the 4th Be With You sale, which apparently is already on. I own pretty much all of them. At one time I definitely owned them all. The newer games still kind of expensive, although $35 for Star Wars Outlaws by modern times may not be that expensive now. Star Wars pinball games for Pinball FX. I assume this is the new Pinball FX from 2023. Yes, not the original Pinball FX. It'll be interesting to see how Star Wars non-digital sales go. Although I've been watching May the 4th for several years now, and I've never really felt like the toys really went on sale in any ways. Particularly Lego's Star Wars stuff would not go on sale, but yeah. I don't know if Disney Plus is going to do anything for Star Wars Day either. Alright, and then War Games Fest is just going to be a bunch of war games, and I'm almost certainly not going to have any interest in any of them at all. Yeah, it's either going to be because they're set around World War I, World War II style fighting, which is too realistic and just uninteresting to me, or they're going to have top-down positional placement style strategy, which is not interesting to me. And I'm not really even interested in historical war games either. So almost every kind of war game is uninteresting to me, except for maybe something like Command and Conquer and StarCraft. And yeah, if I'm saying StarCraft as a war game, I'm really stretching the definition quite a bit there. Command and Conquer, I suppose, also might be technically a war game, but again, you're going into fantasy alternate dimension stuff with Command and Conquer quite a bit, and it's just not so much about the war concept, which the concept of war just in the name is a turn off to me. Again, now we have a sale here that's not got any Steam Deck mentions. Might as well claim the free store items though, even though I'll never use them. I can't help but feel like war themed things around World War I and World War II also have to die out pretty quickly now. Like, the last few people who would have been involved in World War II are likely approaching 100 years old at this point. So, I mean, there just can't be that many people actually directly affected by it. I've come to a decision from some comments made by DF Retro and others saying that they would really prefer the Steam Deck screen over the Steam Deck's OLED screen over the Switch 2 screen, And then they also said they would have preferred the Steam Deck OLED screen over the Lenovo Legion Go S screen. So with that all considered, I think I'm back to suggesting getting a refurbed 512 OLED Steam Deck. Even if it is a couple of years older, that does seem like that is the handheld to get if you must get a handheld, if you're trying to get a handheld because you couldn't pre-order a Switch 2 or get your hands onto a Switch 2. That being said, I also saw a YouTube video, which obviously I'm watching a ton of YouTube here and there, but yeah, usually I'm playing a game on my phone, which is wasting time, and watching YouTube, so I'm accomplishing two things while wasting time. But yeah, I did see a YouTube video of the process of installing SteamOS onto a desktop computer, and it does look like there's a fairly decent chance, depending on the hardware of that desktop computer, that it will work. At least enough for you to live with until potentially a future update. And see, it may very well be the chicken and the egg situation where more and more people might just have to have their hardware survey turned on so that the Steam client tells Valve that they are running SteamOS on a computer that is not a handheld, to convince Valve to put more focus into making SteamOS work on non-handhelds, which almost certainly there needs to be a major pivot there. That's a thought that just occurred to me, is that now with tariffs in the way, I just saw like a $40 device at AliExpress that is now including $41 in tariffs on top of the $40 price. So yeah, with tariffs potentially in the United States, even affecting other countries possibly, the idea now of trying to get SteamOS to work on handhelds should be lower priority, because more likely SteamOS needs to be installable on older computers and laptops and things that can't update to Windows 11 or that don't want to update to Windows 11. Which, by the way, it's a rare case in which I get to talk about PewDiePie, since he doesn't really play video games too much or talk about them on his channel anymore. But yeah, he did a whole video talking about how he installed Linux Mint, which he had already installed Linux Mint before and had some familiarity with it, and seemed to do a pretty good job, and actually got into the weeds quite a bit in what he set up and established on his Linux Mint install. Do I recommend Linux Mint? No, I think that's probably a little bit old-fashioned. 5-10 years ago, sure, but at the moment I definitely think you are better off going with something that is going to be KDE based on the desktop, so that it could potentially use Wayland, which in that case that's probably going to be SteamOS or Bakelite Linux would be my real recommendations. Even if you weren't really planning on playing too many games, SteamOS and Bakelite Linux are really your best options, I think, for your average desktop computer. If you really didn't want SteamOS, I wouldn't recommend trying to install Arch Linux otherwise. If you really didn't want Bakelite, Fedora then would be the suggestion, and then at some point you could rebase Fedora to Bakelite if you changed your mind, without having to change a whole bunch of other things and start over from scratch. But yeah, unless you just absolutely wanted something that was based on Debian, then I would probably say go with Debian or maybe Kubuntu, but probably not. But yeah, it does just occur to me now that SteamOS should totally do a 180 pivot and start focusing in on old computers and trying to install and work on older current hardware and instead of future hardware, because I imagine this year's CES, assuming it happens even, is going to have very few handheld devices that are shown off that are actually going to end up on store shelves in a year's time. I imagine the prices are going to be ridiculously high, and as such it may not even be worth a company's time like Lenovo to make a next year's model of a handheld if it's going to be hundreds of dollars more expensive and sales are just going to be too low. So yeah, refurb Steam Decks is my suggestion. 512 OLED if you get really desperate. A 256 or 512 LCD probably wouldn't be a terrible thought either. Potentially going really cheap on the Steam Deck is hedging your bets in a way that I don't think you really need to, but you might want to do it, where you get a really cheap 256 LCD Steam Deck and then save your money for what potentially is going to be a really expensive Switch 2 in the future. And yeah, increasingly this chart for the Steam Deck I feel like tells me more about what gamers are enthusiastic about over SteamDB's chart, in that some of the games change a lot more here in this chart. I'm hearing from one YouTuber who is frankly approaching spamming a Discord that I follow that Marvel Rivals is losing its fandom, but I'm only really hearing it from that one person, so they may just have an opinion and be loud and repetitive about it. They may not be in the general consensus. But yeah, if I was a little bit younger and hadn't made that mistake previously on a YouTube fan group, I probably would have also thought about spamming my videos to Discords I follow, and at a certain point, if I just didn't care, I may still do that, but yeah, I don't think it really helps much. There's just definitely some weirdness on different kinds of content creators. A lot of them can certainly get the subscribers, but then they can't get the views, or they can get the subscribers and views, but they can't make enough content. Yeah, it's very rarely that you get someone that even begins to seem to me like they have found the right balance where they can actually be successful to some extent. And unfortunately, while this may sound sexist, it is definitely true. There are just a lot of gooners out there, and so any female presenting person who is even slightly attractive is on the easy path of face cam content creation, and assuming they even have a slightly decent personality, they will be doubly fast-tracked. But yeah, you also don't see the pretty people that YouTube often tries to promote. You don't see them sticking around, you don't see them making huge impacts or making enough content to at least catch my attention. I don't see them. Maybe other people do. But yeah, there's someone. Yeah, let's see if we can show off this guy. I'm gonna bring up this YouTuber that I follow called explainingcomputers.com, and he is very much the antithesis of the pretty people. Let's see if we can get a slightly bigger picture of him, maybe if I click on this. Nope. So I'll just use the magnifier. So he's this British guy who has this hideous bowl cut. He's an old dude, and the way he talks is very odd. In that it is very much a robotic, seesaw-y style. Less robotic and more seesaw-y. In the way he talks. And so every single element here, let's see if we can find a picture of him. A lot of times he's not even on camera, but he is on camera very often. Like every single element of this is something that would work against him. But I follow him, and he has 1.1 million subscribers because what he says is easy to understand and it is informative. And so on his general consistence of his name, as far as what he's supposed to be doing as far as explaining computers, he actually accomplishes that. He talks and looks very much like a computer teacher might look like, and very possibly is a computer teacher. But yeah, he is very much the opposite of what most YouTube major successes would be, and having 1.1 million subscribers is really kind of a shame, because you probably should be closer to 10 million subscribers. Now, I can certainly make some complaints about maybe he doesn't go into enough detail, and maybe make some complaints that at 1 million subscribers, maybe he should put somebody else as the speech and the figurehead person on screen and just be the scriptwriter in the background, in the same way that Linus from Linus Tech Tips is somewhat technical, but really he is just the figurehead and the presenter for things that are being written for him by a whole writing team at this point. And yes, Linus looks way better than Explaining Computers guy does. But yeah, this guy will never be suggested by the algorithm as much as he should. He'll never get the level of subscriptions, and that 100% comes down to, even though that the fact that he does do face cam, he is just not young, he is just not beautiful, he is just not presenting female, and all the gooners out there, which it's not just US people. Let's face it, like a significant percentage of Indians in India have that desire. A specific high percentage of people in the Middle East have that desire, that they are just online looking for attractive women through sources and websites that they can access, because yeah, porn sites in particular may not be allowed in their countries. But yeah, it's not just US. In fact, it's probably a lot of other countries. First and foremost, I'd say US is probably somewhere around the 12th most sexist viewing audience on YouTube. But it is also crazy to try and say there isn't sexism amongst the viewing audience on YouTube, and that the algorithm can't really do anything about it, and I'm glad they're not really trying to do anything about it. But also, YouTube and Google definitely play up on that too. When you see pictures of people at YouTube meetups, it's never big, fat, ugly people. It's always beautiful people. It's always content creators that are very much young and pretty, and or rich and famous. Take your pick. Usually, sometimes a little bit of both. Anyways, that's enough of rambling. Let's actually go through the video game news. Through Video Games Chronicle news in particular. Again, my macro only kind of half worked today, and so I had to hand clean everything up. Yeah, I'm still also trying to figure out if there's some way in which I could do all of the warm-up up until this point as footage, and that is just recorded, and then start streaming immediately when I start talking about video game news, and then play the footage up until this point after 2 or 3 hours of going through the news. I still just don't know a way to really do that, though. Yeah, I'm gonna have to experiment with it, and it's just not a high priority at the moment. Alright, so Video Games Chronicle news. Yeah, really not a ton of stuff, although there could have been more stuff from like 3 hours ago. Let's see. Nope, not really. So, Dragon Ball Sparking Zero has been rated for the Nintendo Switch 2. Earlier this year, it was rumored the game would release for the Switch 2 at launch. Okay. So there's going to be a Dragon Ball fighting game on the Switch 2. Near launch. Not super surprising. It is somewhat surprising, though, that it's still Dragon Ball decades later. But, yeah. The Dragon Ball series thrives through its major fandom. Which, interesting, if we went back to the argument of why isn't there a replacement for Dragon Ball yet, if we set instead of why isn't there a replacement for Skyrim, I think for Dragon Ball it's 100% just nostalgia. Like that, there isn't anything amazingly great about Dragon Ball Z in particular, which is what most people really are enthusiastic for, and frankly, most people are only enthusiastic of Dragon Ball Z from the beginning to the Cell saga, and after that point, the Majin Buu content can be skipped, is one of the recommendations I've heard. But yeah, the idea of magical fighting is done in many other anime, but perhaps the problem is that it's not quite drawn out enough or shown long enough. Maybe there's just not enough muscles in other animes that have magical fighting in it. If you compared Bleach in contrast to that, the Bleach 1,000-Year Blood War arc in particular is just moving extremely fast and not drawing it out to set up for attacks, so the attacks don't feel particularly special, and most of the animation in Bleach is done in a very fast way of sword swinging, so you actually can't follow the action that's trying to be depicted on screen as far as punching. Although Dragon Ball Z did a lot of that too, where people are just moving at unviewable speeds. So yeah, I think I'd mostly just chalk it up to Dragon Ball Z being one of the first fighting series that went very long, that had magic in it. And then all of the ones since Dragon Ball Z tried to have their own unique twist on that. Jujutsu Kaisen, I think, is one of it. My Hero Academia is another. One Punch Man, I suppose, is another one. And yeah, each of those have their own kind of unique twist on it that often also include a narrative that's a little bit more than what Dragon Ball Z really offers to you. Because like Dragon Ball as a series could go on forever, because it's really just a continuing story of somebody's life. It's not a there is a final bad guy that must be defeated type story, or a final treasure to be found, or anything like that. Well, this is going to be interesting news. You don't get to report on this very often. Russia is apparently moving to seize World of Tanks developer over Ukraine support. Russia is accusing Lesta and Wargaming of engaging in extremist activities, which one assumes that means in Russia that anything that is anti the Russia-Ukraine conflict is extremist activities. Although it may very well be the case that they didn't actually do anything, and this may just be Russian government needing to seize some assets because they're running out of money. But yeah, this "but for the grace of God" is a saying, and in the United States, yeah, we should think from that perspective. I would suggest too is that there was certainly a point after 9/11 in which more people, more companies could have been shut down or prosecuted for being anti-war, anti the Saddam Hussein war that George Bush was pushing. And yes, in present day, certainly there could be cases that there already seem like there have been threats for anyone who has been anti the Trump administration, for them being prosecuted or persecuted at the very least. Wargaming says they already made a strategic exit from the Russian and Belarusian markets. 3 years ago, the company disposed of its business in Russia and Belarus to local management at zero cost and on a debt-free, cash-free basis with no consideration to take it back. Wargaming does not have any assets or business interest in Russia or Belarus. So yeah. This may very well be, with that update, a case where the Russian government will get some kind of judgment against Lesta Studios or Wargaming, but have no way to really collect on that judgment. So it may not really affect him. But yeah, the war with Russia and Ukraine is affecting more and more people as it continues to drag on, and will continue to affect more and more people. The danger here, certainly, is this is fertile grounds for World War III, in that proxy wars and just unmanaged tinder are left to rot as countries fight each other. Well, companies maybe in the future too, just fight each other over and over again for long drawn out amounts of time, because eventually somebody makes a mistake, eventually it escalates, eventually another group of countries says that's enough and get involved in it. The general idea of forming the UN and having countries talk to each other and try to form peace deals, and just the general idea of countries negotiating for peace and pushing for peace throughout the world, was to prevent yet another world war. And I'm not sure it's going to succeed in the final decision, but certainly was a good idea. And there was even a decent argument being made that blitzkrieg style fast wars were preferable over slow, long, drawn out wars. Whereas if you contrast, say, the United States overthrowing of Saddam Hussein, that was a very fast war in the Middle East. Compare that to the Israelites and the Arabs in the Middle East, who have been fighting for at least 2,000, probably close to 6,000 years, fighting each other, with it still being very drawn out and not going anywhere. Yeah. So, yeah. I could see an argument for things like that. Certainly was the argument in the United States in dropping 2 atomic bombs on Japan, although arguably Japan was already close to being devastated and couldn't have continued the fight for much longer anyways. But there was certainly questions amongst the US military whether the emperor was just going to tell all of the citizens to commit seppuku or harikari or ikarai and kill themselves out of honor, and from what I hear, the citizens of Japan were fully expecting to get those orders and were planning on following them, which that certainly would have been an awkward way to win a war. Instead of killing a significant, perhaps way too many civilians with 2 atomic bombs, the US may have flown some planes over to Japan and found the entire island devoid of life completely. Which that would be a weird alternate history, certainly. As far as more than likely then China, or maybe even North Korea, would have claimed the island, and then somebody who would be fairly anti US would be even closer to the United States, although there's thousands of miles between Hawaii and Japan. Anyways, we're supposed to be talking about video games, and somehow I'm talking about history and war, which is not even really a subject I particularly like, but somehow I managed to absorb some history growing up, and yeah. I don't know where I learned most of the things I learned, frankly. I don't think it was really from teachers, but it must have been. I must have just subconsciously absorbed through osmosis a lot more. And I don't think I particularly had good teachers either, so yeah, I don't know what happened there. It kind of just felt like to me that I always knew things. Even when I was in school, I'd be like, I already know this. And I think probably a lot of that is probably because it was taught the year before, and they were just reteaching the same things every year and just adding a little bit more details each time. But yeah, it doesn't seem like a lot of people remembered any of that. I imagine a lot of people just cheated on tests and never learned the subject matter in the first place. I definitely saw a lot of cheating, way more cheating than I would have ever thought would exist back in school. Let's see, video games though. This is going to take forever if I don't get on the ball. Blizzard is reportedly tapping Nexon to publish Overwatch Mobile and a new StarCraft game. Overwatch Mobile is being called Overwatch 3 internally, which, okay. So, a third Overwatch game that is going to be fairly drastically different, because I just don't see a way, even on modern cell phones, to play a game like Overwatch and have full first person or third person controls. And then if it's Overwatch is a mobile game, maybe the next StarCraft game is a mobile game, which honestly the next StarCraft game being a mobile game actually makes more sense. I do think you can make a StarCraft game on a cell phone and it would work fairly decently. The screen would be too small, certainly, but it, at the very least, a touchscreen makes some sense in a StarCraft game. But yeah, I can't help but wonder if both of these are just going to be gotcha mobile games designed to suck money out of players' wallets. Sucker Punch shares a new Ghost of Yoti details as the game's non-linear campaign is explained. It'll be released in October. Sucker Punch. I feel like Sucker Punch was also the name of a movie production company. Is that the same company? I don't know. And yeah, the macro's still not finding links to Steam games, although Video Games Chronicle almost never does link to Steam pages. But yeah, that's still not working the way it should. Nintendo has released a Nintendo Switch 2 magazine to celebrate the console launch. The magazine will be available physically at Japanese retailers, so not coming out to the West, I would guess, at all. This is twice now, though, we've seen something special being done for the Japanese audience, and twice now this feels like, and not twice, but this feels very much like the new CEO of Nintendo of Japan is just kind of nostalgic for Nintendo Power and doing things in an old-fashioned way. Although maybe this is just a new experiment that the old CEO wouldn't have been willing to do. But yeah, it definitely seems kind of old-fashioned to have print media, even in Japan. Yeah. Will the magazine be free? I would assume, since it's basically ads, it should be. I can't help but wonder if there's a concern here that the Japanese audience just doesn't understand what the Switch 2 is. You can see in this page they're talking about high dynamic range screens. That may very well mean that people in Japan just don't really know, or maybe they don't really care too much about HDR. And you know, those magnetic connectors, which they have made such a big deal about and talked about so much, have very quickly just left the narrative because, you know, they seem like they work good. Did they need to exist though? Not really. Feels like you could still very well have just had slide-on connectors if you wanted to. Like, half wonder if maybe the mouse mode was their first thought, and then the magnetic connectors were added because of mouse mode, so you don't scratch up the tables while you're playing in mouse mode. Yoko Taro thinks AI will make all game creators unemployed in 50 years. The enigmatic creator has shared his thoughts on AI technology. I think he's probably being generous by saying only 50 years. There's a decent chance that almost all game creators will be unemployed in 25. But yeah, AI sucks, and yet my text-to-speech program would be what people called AI in the old days, although it's really not. All the text-to-speech is doing is converting typed-in text from the ad copies of a Steam page into vocalized text. And yeah, but also there's no way I could pay anybody, unfortunately, and there probably would never be a way that I could afford to pay anybody to read out and voice all the lines when there's 3 to 15 shorts coming out every day. I wish I could. I wish, first and foremost, I wish I could pay myself, but yeah, it is 100% a matter for me that either I use text to speech, which some people are going to call AI, and so I know I'm immediately going to get some complaints about it being an AI voice when there is no intelligence there. It's an artificial voice, certainly, but there's no intelligence there. And yeah, I don't know what I'll really say to respond to that. I'll probably just not respond to it. Ironically, I may also get comments going, why don't you have that pretty sounding girl voice all of your videos? Which I've thought about that, and I don't see a real way to do that. There probably is a software, but it probably would be pretty CPU intensive, where it could pick up my voice talking into a microphone and then live convert it into a text to then live convert it into text to speech. Like that's a lot of stuff. And frankly, the live translation feature that they're experimenting with on YouTube just now is the closest thing to something like that, and that is still experimental, and that's translating it to different languages. But yeah, that certainly occurred to me, but the only way it would really work is I would have to just, there'd be a significant delay if anybody put a comment in the chat and I was responding to that, and I would just have to type in everything I was saying. So yeah, if I was in a horrible accident and lost the use of my voice, I could do something like that, and that would be just like the only option, and it would be way better than like Stephen Hawking's system as far as talking goes. But yeah, I have no intention of really doing that unless something horrible happened to my voice. So yeah, it'll just sound like a lady. And also, there's certainly a case that maybe nobody recognizes that it is text-to-speech. I mean, it is just a generic Windows voice model, but how many people use the Windows voices models at all? Yeah, and I don't even think Microsoft's voice models are particularly great. Interestingly, as we're kind of talking about AI here, I really don't have anything to add here as far as Yokotaro and his weird social anxiety helmets that he wears, which that's why I always understood why he was wearing the helmets. This is shy. Apparently in Australia there was a whole radio station that had an AI voice DJ, but the entire DJ was just a made-up person that they typed in text and it just generated the text as it played pop music. Which in reality, if you have a DJ and a radio station and they're not reading ads and they're not introducing the music because they don't really know anything about the music, then they probably aren't adding anything of value to being a DJ anyways. And so most radio stations do tend to say to get very far away from what DJs used to be, and that you might have a filler ad to eat up a few seconds so the music all lines up where somebody talks and acts like they're a DJ, but you're not going to have somebody talk about a whole soundtrack or a whole disc or single and when it was released and who was playing it and what was going on in that person's life. Those kinds of DJs have long since disappeared as far as the people that really have a passion and understanding around music. And I kind of wish I could find more people on YouTube that were like that. Maybe that would teach me to appreciate music a little bit better, but that's not particularly what radio stations want. They just want to play ads as much as possible, so they want as much time available to play ads, and they don't want to pay DJs any money, obviously. Not that they ever really were paying a decent amount to DJs. But yeah, they particularly in pop music don't care for you to appreciate the music. They just want you to feel like you want to listen to it in the background while also playing ads every 5 minutes or so. Moving on, Star Wars Eclipse concept art gives a new look at the missing in action Quantic Dream Star Wars games. The game was announced in 2021 and since then little has been shared. Okay. So we've got some concept art, which doesn't really mean anything to me because I really don't care that much about Star Wars. And I guess we'll leave it at that. Claire Obscure Expedition 33 passes 1 million copies shipped, not including Game Pass players. The debut RPG has been a hit with players and critics. I did see just a bit of gameplay around this, and it definitely seems like there's a big mystery around this whole thing and this whole world. What's going on? That there's just this like world tree looking thing with the number 33 on it, and then seems like people die at a young age. That's what I could figure. And so all of these people in the Expedition 33 agree to spend their last years going to this tree and fighting what I think this painter witch is what they called this character. But yeah, there seems to be a lot of weirdness there. What you do and what you see in that first couple hours. But I wouldn't be surprised also if it does fairly boil down to just being a standard RPG game and maybe has a little bit of influence of Final Fantasy, maybe even has a little bit of influence of something like Darksiders. But yeah, Darksiders 1 in particular took what was effectively a Zelda game and put an edgelord War of the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse character as the protagonist, and just by putting a new coat of paint around what otherwise would have just been a generic Zelda-like dungeon game, that changed things up quite a bit. So having characters with magical abilities, but all wearing these black letter outfits with gold armbands, is perhaps enough of a change visually to be the beginning of something that could go for a while, although maybe not. Like, it may very well be that you can't make an Expedition 34, and honestly I think it would be called Expedition 32 because I think the number goes downward, and so I think it is generally the idea that the world tree had a number on it, let's say like 50, and then all the 50-year-olds die, and then 49 the next year and all the 49-year-olds die, which inherently would kill everybody in a very short amount of time. Because if every year the number goes down 1 and it started at 50, then really you would be killing everyone who was 1 to 25 that first year by the time you got to 25. So everybody would be dead by 25. Yeah, whatever the halfway point would be. once you've reached that halfway point, everybody would be dead if it changes once per year. Because the timeline is going up 1 year, and then the limit is going down by 1 year, so it's moving to... Sorry, don't need to teach a whole math class here. Switch 2 event attendee applauded for reaching Zelda credits in 7 minutes. Somebody has already finished Switch 2's Breath of the Wild. It probably isn't super hard. I think I've seen speedrunners also do that. I don't know what you really accomplish by doing that, other than you're potentially trying to speedrun to parts of the game that they thought maybe they wouldn't have to show. But I would heavily suspect that Zelda on the Switch 2 is a finalized product, and every part of it is going to look as good as you would expect. So yeah. Japanese content creator Ikabozi, I assume that's how you pronounce that, went to an event in Tokyo and then speedran the game to the credits. Which, yeah. Breath of the Wild is another game like Skyrim that I kind of don't feel like is a great game, because it doesn't have that linear progression that a narrative really, I think, needs. And maybe I'm just an old fogey, but yeah, I definitely didn't like the fact that in Breath of the Wild, the best experience you're likely going to have is that you're going to go into one of 4 regions, defeat one of the 4 divine beasts, then go to the other 3 regions in a circle and defeat the other 3 divine beasts, then end up going into the center of the map to fight Ganondorf, which in my playthrough I only defeated, I think, 2 divine beasts and then gave up on it. CD Projekt says the Switch 2 Cyberpunk 2077 improves on the troubled PS4 Xbox One version. Says it's building on top of the PS4 work for the Switch 2. Still very weird to me how Cyberpunk 2077's main protagonist now has just been retconned to be the female version of the custom character creator to look like this. Which that is another narrative thing that I think makes 2077 kind of worse, is the fact that there isn't kind of a named character that you're playing as. There's not, I think, a ton of backstory on the custom character you play as either. Same is true in Skyrim. You're just a random person who happens to be the Dragonborn, and that's basically all the backstory you get. Xbox's Indiana Jones game is selling fastest on PS5 despite releasing months later. PS5 version of The Great Circle is reportedly outperforming Xbox and PC. Well, that is a sad statement as far as PC gaming. It's not particularly super surprising as far as the Xbox version. What also shouldn't be surprising is, once again, I'm going to have to take a bathroom break, so I'm going to pause again, and I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. So yeah, Indiana Jones still very much feels like a weird game to me. To follow up on what I was saying before the break there, just in the case that it is an odd little game to have Indiana Jones in it. It feels like, and it feels like you just never really were going to be able to make a game that satisfied everybody, because everybody has something different in mind as far as what an Indiana Jones game should be. Me in particular, I think Indiana Jones should be a point and click adventure like Indiana Jones the Fate of Atlantis. Whereas Machine Games, I believe, was the makers of this one, wanted to make more of a stealth type game. And yeah, that just created a situation where post-launch hype just seemed kind of low, and even launch hype seemed kind of low. And now that may be playing out even further now that people seem to have been willing to just wait for the PlayStation version. Which it does seem to show that there still is a decent amount of people who have PlayStation 5s instead of PCs or Xboxes, which we knew that most of the people had PS5s over the Xbox, and we didn't want to really admit it to ourselves, or I didn't want to admit it to myself, that there were more people with the PS5 over the PC. Which, yeah, this perhaps echoes what we'll see in hardware sales numbers as far as PS5 units being sold during this Christmas season, as Switch 2s become too expensive or too hard to get. Apparently, life-size Pokemon plushies of Flareon, Vaporeon, and Jolteon and Eevee are out now. Although Eevee is, I guess, not being shown here. And life-size, in this case, seems to indicate huge. I guess there's a... Looks like there's a Espeon also at some point. But yeah, if we look at scale, let's just assume that this is a real plant pot. And then we can see that it's taking up about over one tile. So let's assume that this is actually relatively big at 15 inches. Then this feels like this is 45 to 60 inches from front to back and 30 plus inches left to right. When you look at this lady, assuming she's in the right scale, this looks huge. Same is true for the drawers and the microwave, the sink. These look completely giant, which would make me assume they probably cost somewhere around $200 or $300 just on the markup, and probably are extremely limited. £379, not $300, even more. And Eevee is coming in at 40 pounds, so Eevee must not be the same size as the rest of them. Yeah, that is really, really expensive. And then at that scale, you probably still are not paying enough, even at nearly $400 US, to guarantee that the stitch work is going to be particularly good. These could very well be middle tier quality stitch work as far as sewing all of this together. And even as a cosplay prop, it is way too expensive. Even if you're getting paid to cosplay, it's way too expensive. So, yeah, I just seems just like crazy that this kind of thing even exists. Although weirdly, I imagine this thing has always kind of existed. There is like a giant Snorlax, basically bedding that you can have where you put it on the floor and you can basically sleep on it. It's so big. That also is at that same price range. And yeah, I've thought about that, but then never been that crazy to spend that kind of money. And I'm certainly not even really a Pokemon fan, so it didn't really make sense. And this doesn't make sense. And this is echoes of the past of insane fandom, fanaticism, really, where you're getting suckered into paying ridiculous amounts of money. This is Gucci bag levels of branding, where you're just getting a $100 handbag that costs $1,000 because it has a Gucci label on it. Things like that, high fashion nonsense. Here we have an older story saying that they had sold more than 500,000 copies in the first 24 hours. So it went from 5,000 copies, 500,000 copies to 1 million copies. Which, okay. It's kind of pointless to even mention an article that gets updated and surpassed. Particularly, even if it is in the case of Video Games Chronicle, that they didn't update this article as much as they published a new one. Completely separate. And then a game that was released on the same day as Oblivion Remastered is getting a joke spiritual re-release. Post-Trauma, the re-release, except for not unreleasing it first, and it's pretty much the same, is coming in June. Which I'd assume that's not really the title here. But yeah. Can a company even jokingly take a second bite at the apple? I'd say probably no. Is it their fault that Oblivion was released the day they even announced it as a remaster, really? No. So yeah, I can feel their pain, but I don't think it's going to help them much. And maybe in June, people will be more open to a horror game, which honestly is a very different audience anyways. But yeah, there may be other competition in June. And I'm not sure I've ever really locked down if game competition is really that big of a deal anyways. I mean, if you looked at it on the numbers, hundreds if not thousands of games may be released on the same day as your game on Steam, but in reality, one, maybe two of them are going to be big enough that they would actually pull any audience away from your game. If you just do the basic things of advertising your game even slightly to the right audience that actually would be interested in it, it'll probably sell. And certainly we've seen that the impact of wishlisting games is way bigger on Steam. So had Post-Trauma had thousands of wishlisted games and then come out the same day as Oblivion, it probably wouldn't have suffered anywhere as much as it seems to feel like it suffered. And this screenshot certainly is weird, and that you have these different head-looking mannequin creatures, although maybe they aren't really mannequins, and then they just have these smoothed over genitals. So that would be interesting, certainly, if there was a monster that looked like mannequins but wasn't a mannequin. It's a puzzle horror game designed to pay tribute to PS1, PS2 era survival horror games. Okay, well, I'll move us over to the Gematsu articles, and we're actually going to go through this news fairly quickly. As far as I can tell, the Gematsu person, which is only one person, is playing Oblivion or doing something else, because there is only 6 news stories today. Claire Obscure Expedition 33 selling 1 million, which, yes, this had my macro worked, but I've opened up this, which this is already on my wish list. So yeah, when you look at some of these screenshots though, well, it does have a different art style. When you actually start get down to it, it really just kind of feels like a maybe turn-based, maybe timing-based Final Fantasy style RPG game. This definitely feels like one of the Final Fantasy games. And yeah, when you start to see the actual interface and all, it definitely screams RPG. You get kind of a contrasting color palette in that first hour experience, and then I think that goes away. I think all the color gets basically drained out of the whole experience. Let's see if we can see some of this gameplay. There is something certainly to be said about just putting a different color of paint on things and not having it be a Tolkien-esque fantasy game where it's just orcs and trolls. But yeah, it also might just be too weird of a storyline for people to really embrace. But see, there's some sequence. There's a sequence at the beginning where it's colorful and they're not in that black outfit. One thing I see in the gameplay here is it does feel very video gamey in the prompts and such. And so I question if maybe it doesn't visually match the themes and the story being shown. But yeah, I also wonder if this might be closer to like a boss rush game and less grindy than what you would expect from like a JRPG, and that this might be 15 hours instead of 200 hours. But yeah, there's apparently a lot of mystery that you're gonna spoil yourself on if you watch other people play this game. At a certain level, I guess it's worth also pointing out though that it's still just kind of the same old it's still one of these games where it's just gonna have that grinding mechanism to it, And yeah, you're just gonna keep on having to grind to get through the story. And so when I see RPG games like this, I really wonder if I shouldn't. I still kind of, I guess it's not wonder, it's a wish that there were very easy modes, abridged modes of these kinds of games where you can fight just like one of these enemies one time very quickly, and then you never see that enemy again, and then you just kind of boss rush through the story. Whereas I imagine that's not the case. I imagine you're going to see enemies like this multiple times throughout the game and grind through it multiple times. Although, who knows, it might also be somewhat of a Dark Souls-like game where you only defeat the boss once and there's just a lot of bosses or sub-bosses. Let's see. Uma Musume Pretty Derby English version launches June 26th, which I am shocked that is coming to the West, or at least getting an English version. Perhaps it's an exaggeration to say it is coming to the West. It is probably mostly a mobile game, if I was to guess, from the looks of it. But I'll actually put that on the follow list. Now that I have these new checkboxes, I am going to still mostly put things that I'm actually interested in. Well, no, I'm going to put all the things I'm actually interested in still on the follow list. But if it's something that I'm not interested in, I'm just going to do nothing and leave the tab open. Then when I run my macros to make YouTube shorts, I'm going to have the macro automatically check this checkbox to say that is when you made a YouTube short on it, and that's when you first saw it. Which inherently doesn't mean I am not going to make another YouTube short on it, but it probably means that just out of an efficiency. And then the VR, I'm only going to click if it happens to be a VR game that I actually want to keep. It's not even going to be VR games that I want to put on the follow list. It's going to be VR games that I actually want to keep, which is going to mean I would have to go through some extra work to even find them and look at them in the future. Dragon Ball Sparking Zero is rated for the Switch 2 in Saudi Arabia. Interesting. You can see it's rated very positively here on Steam. Of course, I cannot justify buying any Dragon Ball game here since I already have one Dragon Ball game, which still has a bunch of season content that I haven't purchased, that I haven't covered or played, and very possibly will never cover and play. A survival horror first-person shooter called Eternal Evil is coming to PS5 and Xbox Series on May 30th. Eternal Evil. Yeah. Guess I'll drag this over here and remind myself to try and figure out how that works. Why that isn't working later. Yeah, Eternal Evil looks interesting. Feels like a Resident Evil type game. Although weirdly, no voice acting and text via mouth pop-ups. Now the danger here is this looks too much like Resident Evil. It may just be a ripoff of Resident Evil. That being said, is that really so bad? If somebody made Resident Evil 1 or Resident Evil 2 and they did it on a smaller budget but then just changed the layout a little bit and gave you more of stuff you already liked, is that really that terrible as a ripoff concept? Little Kitty Big City is coming to the PS4 and 5 on May 9th. It's currently available for the Xbox One and Series Switch and PC. I'll take this one over there too, just to, so I know what I'm doing. Little Kitty Big City overwhelmingly positive on Steam. And then Sting has announced a board game style RPG called Varactol for PC. I've never heard of a company called Sting. They made the Dokapon series, I guess. Okay. I guess I'll give this a chance, although probably shouldn't. And see, weirdly, that's all the Gematsu articles. Like, it seems like almost nothing happened over the weekend. Now, why did nothing happen over the weekend? I believe it also was Mother's Day weekend over that. Maybe it was Easter. No, I think last week was Easter. Yeah, last week was Easter because it was 420. But yeah, I believe this weekend was Mother's Day weekend, so maybe that affected why there wasn't as much video game news over the weekend. Maybe I streamed fairly late into Saturday morning, and now I'm streaming fairly early, relatively speaking, into Monday evening. That's a possibility. But it just may also be that the end of the month weekends are always fairly slow, and yeah, I don't think we are going to see lots happening on the weekends as far as video game news either. Anyways, so the Gaming on Linux news is that System 76 Cosmic Alpha 7 is out with new accessibility features, global shortcuts, and more. I don't really think I'd recommend System 76 Linux either. Again, it is built off of Pop! OS, which is designed to look a lot like what Mac OS looks like in the Apple products, while really not addressing the elephant in the room, which is that it just isn't Mac OS. And so the second something looks a little different or is a different program from what people are expecting amongst the Apple fanboys, they would reject this completely. It is dynamically opposites ends of the scale as far as Apple fans potentially moving to Linux, in that Apple fans want a Linux that would be exactly like Apple's software, versus Windows fans potentially moving to Linux, where Windows fans don't exist, and thus the people who would move to Linux from Windows want something completely different from what Windows 11 is offering. One of those groups, as far as Windows users, is willing to make changes, and big changes, whereas Apple MacBook users and things like that are not willing to change, and so they almost certainly wouldn't move to Linux unless there was an absolute necessity to do it, and I don't think there really is. Which definitely paints Linux operating systems like Pop! OS and the Cosmic Desktop in a weird situation. I can applaud them for adding high contrast mode and color filters and inversion and mono sound, as far as just helping people with color blindness. Is what the color filters are, where people who can only hear in one ear, bringing it down to mono. Also improvements in the magnifier, global shortcuts, which magnifiers are definitely useful. You see me use the magnifier all the time when I'm streaming in Windows, and I use it when I'm not streaming all the time too. Of course, I'm looking at a TV that's 8 feet away when really there should be a monitor that's 2 feet away from me, just so I could actually read things and look at things. Yeah, I guess when I do move over to Linux, I might need to figure out if I can do a magnifier quite the same way. It would be a shame to lose that functionality, but almost certainly there is something that can be done there. Yeah, it will be a long process of just getting everything on a Linux build to work the way my Windows worked or better as far as streaming goes. Dune Awakening has set a public playtest for May 9th to the 12th, but the anti-cheat concerns the author for Linux on Steam Deck. And I feel like we'd already talked about this story, which maybe means we had already talked about this story, which would also mean that only one story was new. Love board games and pure chaos. Fortune Avenue is a new spin on Monopoly, out in early access. This too has a Steam link that did not open. And then let's see, Lost for Swords. It's a unique deck building dungeon crawler that's different each time. That too has a Steam link. I think we'd already covered all that. So yeah, and then that's going to bring us to GameDeveloper.com, which only 2 stories from this. The Journey developer, That Game Company, is going to co-host a game jam with $10,000 prize pool. The 3-week event will champion developers creating 4-quadrant games. What are the 4-quadrant games, though? Do they mean young women, old women, young males, old males, as far as the quadrants go? I mean, you could have lots of different 4 quadrants. Yeah, which they describe as projects that can be equally enjoyed by all ages, which maybe they're thinking of 4 quadrants that are different age groups, although I don't know where you draw the line in those 4 quadrants. Like 0 to 10-year-olds, 11 to 20-year-olds, 21 to 40-year-olds. But yeah. Okay, I guess that's good information to know. I still question whether game jams have a lot of value. It seems like it's a 3-week vacation that they're proposing more than anything else. I have never really seen a game jam game lead to a proper developed game being made, or even sprouting ideas for a proper game. We may see more game jams happening though, as fewer and fewer publishers are going to have the money to invest on medium-sized and small-sized games. You may just see game developers wanting to pretend like they're game developers even though there's no money paying them, so they'll just continuously have game jams or go to game jams or go to other kinds of conferences and socialize and agree. It's kind of, it might be the equivalent of like going to job fairs. If you have no job, going to a job fair often is a great way to make it look like you have a job, or at least you're being busy and pretending like you have a job. Of course, I'm not sure job fairs are particularly good for actually getting employed anywhere. I don't know how anybody gets employed, frankly. I saw a Reddit article where someone refused an invitation to the 7th interview for a job. She had been through 6 other interviews, and they were begging her practically to come into a 7th interview. And it's like, yeah, that is more than reasonable. Frankly, I think by the 3rd interview it's getting ridiculous. It certainly would speak to how much they value your time or how organized a company is if they're even having third interviews as far as the way things go. Although that inherently is going to depend on it. If you're interviewing at McDonald's and they want you for a second interview, forget it. It's not worth it. But if they're interviewing you for $1 million CEO position, 5, 6, 7 interviews might be reasonable. But 7 seems kind of over the line. I think 5 is probably the max. And there'd have to be justifications for why that was more than 2, even. Moving on, the IO Interactive co-founder has launched a new consensus-driven studio called Wombo Games. They're developing Raiders of Black Veil for the last 2 years. They have been developing it. Which this says Steam Early Access, but in this case, I don't think GameDeveloper.com puts any links into anything. There are 2 links on this page that I can find. One is in the middle of nowhere, and one is IO Interactive co-founders. So let's open those 2 tabs and see what that loads to. A page that is World War II's MMO Heroes in General shut down, so this would have been an ad that's being blocked, but the link itself wasn't being blocked. And then a link to GameIndustry.biz. So yeah, GameDeveloper.com doesn't link to Steam games from the looks of it, so I don't need to be concerned about that. Alright, so let's look at all the new games on Steam, which even that is likely not going to be too many things. Of course, once again, my curation is still broken, so yeah, we may get a lot of nonsense games and hopefully not family friendly games. But yeah, I went back to the 24th, and so that should be good enough. Now here's the question: why are these going to sleep still? That makes no sense. See, I still question if maybe this English language not supported should be higher up on the page, but trying to move that around is probably a waste of time. I've already spent too much time. So yeah, I believe it's also Golden Week in Japan, so we might be seeing higher numbers of Japanese games because of that. But yeah, I changed the setting on Firefox that was supposed to automatically have all these things loaded up, and yet it doesn't seem like it's doing that. And frankly, some of the settings I changed might have been the things that last screwed up my computer and caused me to lose footage. So far I'm not seeing any problems, so yeah. So we may not even have that many games. Now, the danger here, first of all, is that this is going to take too long loading all these pages. But also, the danger here is that I, over the past weeks, have skipped a lot of games. And so, who knows what's potentially going to happen here. I guess that is an interesting question as far as do games sell better if they're happening during Golden Week in Japan? Or is this just superstition that doesn't really play out? Or is it the Japanese perhaps being superstitious and then hurting themselves by cramming all their games into a week? Yeah, I'm noticing though that a lot of these games may have very well measured the exact amount of space of text, and by adding this button it's bumping everything else downward, which that's going to be a problem with my macro a little bit, as far as when it starts to look for the follow, whether it's been checked or not, it may not be able to find it. You think it would be easy enough to tell a browser to just load everything into RAM and keep it in RAM. As crazy as that may seem, all I'm asking for it to do is just not try and outthink me. Yet, that is not what's happening here. At least it doesn't feel like it. Yeah, and we haven't even gotten to the point yet where we're seeing new games. I don't think so, at least. I can't help but feel like this week, this weekend is going to be just a horrible collection of garbage games. I'd assume that there was a lot of people who had either figured or heard through the grapevine that Oblivion Remastered might be coming out. Enough so that they would move their game away from it. It also might just be that now is just really not the time that you would release a new game anyways. I keep saying Oblivion Remastered, but in reality, all you really had to know is that there would have been an announcement around the Switch 2, and that should have been more than enough reason to delay your game a little bit and get outside of the talk around the Switch 2. There definitely is an alternate universe where the Switch 2 came out. It was announced for $300, $250 even, and then everybody would be talking like mad about the Switch 2 in positive terms, instead of the narrative mostly being it's overpriced and it's impossible to get anyways, which contradictory lies here is another adult game that shouldn't have been in the listing in the first place. But yeah, you are definitely, I still think, going to have a lot of people who on one side of their mouth is going to say the Switch 2 is too expensive, but then also are going to say it just doesn't matter because their kids will throw a fit or their kids deserve it. And inherently that is going to be, I think, the downfall of a lot of families as financial struggles happen. Everybody may just end up struggling regardless, but I think you will find a lot of people that are going to try and maintain an opulent lifestyle, and only until they are forced to give it up will they actually give it up, usually by just being massive amounts of debt, which even then, who knows. Yeah, there's plenty of people, frankly, that they're just constantly in debt regardless, and it's not 100% their fault usually. The vast majority of people that I see around the world, or in the United States even specifically, are not earning enough money for their efforts. They're just being underpaid and usually overworked too, so that they couldn't go and work a second job. And even the ones that are hustling and working 2 or 3 jobs tend to not be still doing particularly well. There's a comedian who says people live within their means, and I don't think that that's really true. I think people definitely adapt, but yeah, I don't think it really is the case that if you're making, say, even a massive $10,000 a month, that you are just going to start spending $10,000 a month on things that you otherwise wouldn't have spent on before. What it would be more likely is a case of, once you've paid off all your bills and once you have extra cash, you tend to start saving it and being able to save it. But if you're living paycheck to paycheck, then yes, you're living within your means then. I guess a better explanation for that is, if you gave somebody $1 million, statistically, the people will blow that money. Why do they blow that money? Not because they are spending it so much on themselves. It's because they're getting bad financial advice, and every friend and family member is asking for a cut of it. And frankly, the people who would have gambled to make win $1 million in the first place tend not to be the kind of people who would do great with it, with money in the first place. This is an interesting, perhaps somewhat sexist game, an alternate history visual novel where all historical figures have their genders reversed. Yeah. That there are plenty of female figures in history, despite the fact that a lot of female people who should be in history almost certainly got written out of it. But just like reversing it, that reverse sexism approach is not the move here. So turning the Pope, for instance, into a female, well, is a sexy, probably AI generated image, which is really all this is, that really spits into the face of actual history and doesn't really tell an interesting story. If you turn George Washington into a female, then you're erasing all the elements of Martha Washington, George Washington's wife, and as far as how much she contributed to the foundation of the United States. And see, I don't even know what picture this is supposed to be. Yeah, what male picture was there where there were 3 males in a hot spa? Yeah, I think that one is just filler. So yeah, I can't really agree with the premise here, particularly since it doesn't seem like they really did anything good with it, but I've spent way too much time talking about that. If you want gender equality, tell a good story with characters who could be any gender, and then flip a coin as far as what gender you want to give them, and have a decent approaching 50% mix. Which, even like the romance dating games, I do feel like they tend to target an audience that probably wouldn't appreciate that, whereas I would kind of prefer that if there's a dating game where 4 of the, this is just a Sword Art Online clone from the looks of it, but yeah, if there was a dating game where it was 4 males and 4 females, I think you would lose too much of an audience going in that direction. But yeah, I would be interested in seeing a game like that. And even in that, most dating games nowadays have someone who presents as the same gender as the main protagonist. Not, I wouldn't say most, but a lot of them do, yeah. And that's more accurate. Where you have at least one character that's either transgender or hermaphrodite, or just straight up a same gender as the protagonist. I'll give this a chance. This is probably nothing. I had a thought about these kinds of games, these live action Chinese games. Softcore, super softcore porn games, basically, for a Chinese audience that's not allowed to have porn. As far as, yeah. Partial nudity, sexual references, alcohol abuse. Actually, as far as content in the game, and no real rating. Yeah, my thought was, I wonder how many horny 16-year-olds have Steam accounts and like dive into these kinds of games around the world in general, or just in the US, either way. Because yeah, that certainly could be a back door there. If you have, say, adult filters on your internet, but you're allowed to go on Steam. I don't know if Steam has, well, actually, I guess I kind of do know that Steam, well, I don't know, I may have, like, I have adult filters on some of the IP addresses that my router hands out, but I know I've also exempted it for my cell phone. Maybe I exempted it for my PC also. I very likely did. But yeah, there is a safe search always on Google thing. So if anybody tries to go to Google, it'll turn on safe search and force it on. But I don't know if there is a safe search Steam, I don't think there is. Certainly there's room for something like that. In that if you went, instead of store.steampowered.com, you went to safestore.steampowered.com, would that potentially do a better job of filtering out things like this? And I guess there's a real question as far as where would Steam draw the line? Although in fairness, I guess it is also worth saying that if you did have a horny 16-year-old playing visual novels, Chinese visual novels, to romance them and get maybe a boob here and there, they would be doing so much reading that you should probably just take it as a win. Like, it would be the equivalent of somebody stealing a Playboy in previous decades and then having to actually read all the articles before getting to the centerfold and seeing the actual nudity. Yeah. Certainly you'd have to leave it up to each parent as far as whether you'd prefer them to be playing live 3D dating games or animated 2D dating visual games. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if parents these days would be concerned about a kid 16-year-old being an incel if they were playing dating games, dating visual novel games. Which I suppose there is some room for concern there. Of course, telling them to go out and touch grass in that instance is not appropriate. So I don't know what you do otherwise. This is a striking art style, sharp edges. I don't know why I put so many of these visual novels still on my follow list anyways though. Like, I'm just never gonna have enough time to play any of them. Maybe 2 or 3 in the next decade at most. I would have to be so picky. And that's certainly something that I would have hoped that having a Steam Deck would have helped me with, but yeah, it's just not realistic that that would be helpful. I'm still very shocked that so many visual novels come out on PC and don't come out on cell phones. Probably just because I imagine Apple wouldn't approve them. Maybe the screens. Sorry, yawning again. Maybe the screens are still just a little too small for most visual novels. Shouldn't be too far away from being done. Yeah, I do think my guess is probably correct here, and that none of these games are particularly good. And here we have yet another crash tab. Infinity Nikki is out, but finally on Steam after a very long time being out on other platforms. That's only 50% positive, which is a shame because I really was hoping it would be way better. So let's see what he's saying. They want a lowered pity system, 180 pulls for a full outfit. It sounds like a massive amount of pulls. The Meyer crown resets every 14 days regardless of events. I don't know what that is. Pulls you can trade for surging ebbs. Should only cost 5 to 10 surging ebbs. Surging ebbs is what you get when you get a pull a duplicate, so having to currently pull 20 duplicates to get a new pull, I should be able to get 5 of each type of a wish a month in the Sparklight store. Okay, so from what I'm gathering here, without getting into the jargon, the game is greedy. It's a greedy little gotcha game that is targeting, I thought, girls. At least I thought the first one of these on mobile was targeting girls. But if anything, it seems like maybe it just got some high praise when it probably gave free accounts to the players, the reviewers, and the real players playing the game have come to recognize that it's just way too overpriced. And while, yeah, it maybe has some high fashion dresses and outfits that maybe take a little bit of more animation, it certainly doesn't seem like it's being appreciated for the cost, which is a shame because I'm still always looking for little girl games, and I had hoped that Infinity Nikki would have been the beginning of a whole new genre. And I guess there still is a high chance that somebody could rip off Infinity Nikki if they wanted to, but I doubt we'll see too many rip-offs. Let's see, Drive-Thru Simulator Prologue is mostly negative. We have 2 more games. Office Simulator, which looks like nothing that would interest me. And then Wuthering Waves, which must have just come out of early access. Which I read very positively. Does it have in-app purchases? Yes, it's a free-to-play game. Would I really play a game like this? Probably not, but I am desperate to get things off my wish list. I mean, off my fall list, so I'll put it on the wish list. And I definitely need to move the end of show image if I'm going to go through the fall list cleanup news, which is what I'm going to do here. So this one's been out for a while, December 7th, 2024. So I'm thinking taking this one off. This looks like it's a Papers, Please clone of sorts, but visually less polished, not really relevant as far as the all-time peak players only being 3. Yeah. You weirdly do seem like you get this situation with news from games, in that some games will get updated and you'll get news from them, even though the game itself seems to be completely irrelevant, not have any reviews. At least this game at one time had a few hundred people playing it, and it's rated very positively, so it's a very active fan base, or passionate fan base, maybe. Starless Abyss. I guess the question here is really, am I going to ever want to play a strategy deck building game? I might. So I'll put that on the wish list. That was only a couple days ago. You can notice how some of these games get updates or are rated very positively very fast, whereas others take much longer amount of time. This one, while rated very positively, also came out January 5th, 2023, so that's actually asking quite a lot. This would be part 2 of that same story. Which has much fewer reviews. Again, this is my way of working around the fact that I cannot load the Steam follow page normally as I'm going through the news, and this is also just in general, I think, a better way of looking at games that really have been updated to decide whether I want to do something with them or not. And right now I'm trying very hard to decide to do something with all of the games. In the future I might decide to do less of that, particularly considering how a significant amount of these games are going to end up just being clicked like that and not on the follow list, just because they're going to be something that I've seen but don't really care to ever actually play. Of course, I could also take things off the follow list and not check them if there's not really a large chance of me ever playing the game or seeing the game again. I went back just a few days as far as all the new news goes. And it does seem like the new news gets updated fairly quickly. But I'm not sure if the old news feed gets updated or if it is just stagnant. So as I try to go back further and further, see, here's an example of a game that's from December of 2023 and it's still in early access, and that's just too much for me, frankly. It's just been in early access for too long. And here we can eliminate anything that's mixed reviewed. Leave that one alone on the follow list. But yeah, I can't help but feel like there's a lack of impact in going through all the new games nowadays, and that there's probably always been a lack of impact there. Now it kind of feels like going through the news of games that were already on the follow list is even less impactful. Maybe I should move things around a little bit and look at the news first and treat it like actual news. Yeah, there's way too many articles, and very often it's just the same articles over and over again, or the same games over and over again. I guess again, this is an example of where I need the curation to kick in and actually work. Because if the curation did kick in and actually work, then it would have opened all of these tabs automatically for me. At least that's the hope. And by opening all the tabs for me automatically, it also then would remove duplicates and maybe save myself some time. It does just feel very weird now that I'm looking at the news, though, to see just how many games treat their listings on Steam like GitHub pages, and they just they launch a game at version 0.0.1, and then maybe a couple weeks later they put out version 0.0.2. They have the Devils overwhelmingly positive. Might as well just add it to the library. It's free to play. And no, they call it Of the Devil, not Play of the Devil. Then $10 potentially to get the real game. Yeah. It's one of those tricks, isn't it? And I fell right for it. Guess I could hide games from my Steam account if I really needed to. Yep. Not happy with Infinity Nikkei. So yeah, that was just till Thursday as far as the things. Alright, well, I guess I'm probably pretty sleepy now, and that's gonna be it for this stream since I have nothing else to say. So yeah, as always, I guess I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.